Good morning. So the role of the National Cybersecurity Centre is to make the UK the safest place to live and work online. That extends beyond protecting our military defences and critical infrastructure, as the previous speakers have discussed, through central local government, protecting UK businesses, other organisations, and even individual citizens. So that's quite a big remit. Inevitably, we in the course of doing that, we encounter widespread use of commercial commodity devices, mass market platforms, the same devices that are throughout this hall that everybody uses every day. So what my team looks for in platform security research is interesting examples of, useful examples of security technology in commodity devices which we can use to make the UK a safer place to live and work. When we found those technologies, we then have to encourage their adoption throughout the ecosystem. And that's hard. I'm going to argue that security, adoption of security technology is hard because the incentive structure is wrong throughout the whole ecosystem. And I want to suggest how we can create some better incentives for people to start using these things. So here's a typical platform, commercial device. If you think of the lower layer as a set of hardware components which are all independently manufactured, often by different people, an OEM, an equipment manufacturer, puts all of those things in a box. On top of the hardware runs a layer of firmware, other software which configures that hardware and sets it up. On top of that, you have something like an operating system or a hypervisor or more code that helps hold the platform together. And then right at the very top level, you have applications. So the job of technology adoption essentially boils down to convincing these companies, the device manufacturers, to pull out one of those cards and replace it with a different one without damaging the rest of the platform. Maybe with a stronger one or more isolation, but basically changing the house of cards without knocking it down. That's quite a hard sell. So it's really got to be worth it to convince somebody to make a change like that to their device. So here's another analogy. If you imagine the device as an iceberg, the visible part of that is the part the customer sees and interacts with, things like the user experience, the speed, various graphical performance for something like a smartphone or a laptop. The price tag is something they can see and interact with, and they have to pay for it. The rest of it is still there. It's under the water. Things like board design, the code reviews, the tamper protection, all of the cryptography. But improving it doesn't obviously result in more sales, because nobody can see it and it doesn't get interacted with. Security features are often below the waterline until something goes wrong, obviously, but we try not to wait for that to happen. And you can see why it's hard to convince a marketing department to incorporate new features if they'll be invisible. So if a technologist or a hardware manufacturer has a cool new idea, trying to get that through to market is difficult. So hardware is out there. You may be familiar with some of these acronyms if you're a hardware security geek like me. If you're not, or even if you're a different type of security geek, you might not have heard of all of them because they're below the waterline. Marketing their benefits to people is not easy. You have to know about crypto, you might have to know about processor architectures, and for some reason, not everybody's interested in all that stuff. Equally, marketing to software developers is not particularly easy either. These technologies and components are present in our devices, but it's extra effort to take advantage of them, so often developers don't bother. They'd rather use standard libraries that exist elsewhere. And that's bad because many people are using less secure alternatives instead. I mentioned marketing, so I've got to have a quick rant about security marketing. Lots of product slogans often boil down to one of these two things. We're not inspiring confidence. We're not enabling good decision making. We're playing on fear, uncertainty, and doubt. And as a community, we have to be clear that's not helpful. So what should we do instead? So we'd like to encourage the market to focus on reducing harm. It should be hard to exploit systems at scale. If breaks do happen, and we know they will happen, we have to be able to fix them promptly, and we have to be able to answer the question about how vulnerable we are, because that's how we have enough information to react appropriately when we see a problem. That last one means knowing what's connected, knowing what state it's in. Good practice should be easy. So in terms of new incentives, imagine we're working trying to encourage software developers to take more advantage of hardware security technology, like these examples. If my platform is a house of cards, I need to build my solutions that fit into that in a sensible way. They need to be really easy for a developer to use. That means clear APIs, it means good documentation, it means making that documentation easy to find, and investing in that effort of communicating the benefits of technology to the people who should be using it. So to incentivize the vendors to take more care of the lower part of their iceberg below the waterline, we need to invest in providing tools and techniques to actually expose bits of that iceberg that are currently invisible. That means helping people look, helping people make good decisions, producing tools to examine and understand the invisible components and produce clear actionable output. So producing those tools is hard. It requires technical expertise. But it should be possible for anyone or a decision maker to understand the output from those tools and to use that actionable, objective information to make a good decision. Questions like, what components are inside this device? Are they all up to date? And if something's wrong, what can I do about it? What are my options? So we can also help the market by being clearer about what we want to buy. So rather than just saying, I want it to be more secure, or I want military-grade cryptography, or other such phrases that crop up, we want to state clearly what outcomes we want, and then it's easier to help people get there. And mostly this is about making sure we get the basics right. So most of the harm to UK systems that we see as a cybersecurity center comes from relatively basic mistakes. Bad credential management, think default passwords or poorly chosen passwords or incorrectly stored. Poorly configured devices, ports left open when they should be closed, connections that shouldn't be there, accesses that should be closed off, and devices not being updated. So existing public vulnerabilities that everyone knows are there that haven't been fixed. And that includes firmware. So I'll come back to firmware later. It's a hot topic. So what can we do to improve those things? And once we've been clearer about what we actually want, improving them does require technical expertise, and it requires this community to do the right thing. But now we're clearer about why we're doing it. So managing credentials can involve, rather than passwords, which are quite hard to remember, as several other speakers have said at this event, can we use keys? Can we use hardware key storage? Use the features that already exist in your devices to do the crypto properly and in a usable way to make that credential management really easy. Configuring devices correctly. Again, it needs to be easy. The device should be secure by default, should be out of the box, and configuring should not be difficult, and it shouldn't be up to the user or an integrator or a developer to get this right when it's complicated. As we said in other talks yesterday, training people takes time, and it's much easier to make their job easy, make the right thing the easiest thing to do. Finally, updating devices promptly requires good knowledge of how they work, and also how the different components interact. So a specific comment about firmware. Updating firmware is currently too hard. Now, everyone's seen in the last few weeks some very highly publicized vulnerabilities in hardware requiring a firmware update in order to fix your platform. Most of you have seen them not because the impact of this particular vulnerability is so devastating, but actually because it got a lot of press and it got a logo and it got on the front pages. But the real story about these vulnerabilities is not how devastating they are and how easy they are to exploit, because they're quite hard to exploit. But they're very hard to fix, very hard to patch. Mitigating these vulnerabilities required 6 months of collaborative effort across the ecosystem, from hardware vendors, software vendors, OS manufacturers, OEMs. And that's too hard. We can't do that every single time there's a vulnerability, because there'll be more of these things. So this is a heartfelt plea to industry to fix this problem. We need to make it easier to update these devices when they go wrong, to fix problems, and it's not good enough to sit behind the defense of, well, there's too many components, we're worried about breaking something, we don't understand how this interaction is going to work. We have to proactively fix this, because more of these vulnerabilities are going to happen, and we need to be able to fix them. In future, it is essential that components can be independently updated, and that updates can be pushed to devices by default. Now, that's partly because looking at the complexity of systems today, we can see that it's hard. But we know this is getting worse, because with IoT devices, the average home, the average office, and indeed the average car are going to consist of a very large number of components, and all of them need to be kept up to date and to be understood in order to objectively understand how secure we are. So this is a problem that industry is going to have to solve over the next few years, and it needs to start now. Now, this isn't just a problem. This is an opportunity. So there's a business opportunity in here for companies that can do the right thing, that can understand how to encourage good behavior, and can also help people measure exactly what state they're in. So measuring components in a product would be a very useful tool to have. If I had one of those, that would be a cool thing. Helping manage products. What do I have? What's connected? What access is it allowed? There's an opportunity for manufacturers of devices to differentiate on their ease of use. If I'm requiring everybody to update all of their devices, the ones that update automatically are going to be much more attractive to consumers. So this is the NCSC's approach to being clearer what we want to buy, what we want to see. Over the last couple of years since our organization's inception, we've been doing an awful lot more than our predecessor of being public, publishing our guidance on the open internet where everyone can see it. And interestingly, that makes it a lot more useful because a lot more people read it. On the left there, you've got our end-user device security collection, which is guidance on how to configure and manage the main end-user device platforms in use across government, which unsurprisingly are the same devices that are in use across the world. Things like common smartphones, laptops, desktops, operating system environments. The guidance goes through the principal security characteristics that we'd like to see from those devices and how the main platforms measure up and how you can use the features that you need to get the best out of them. This helps our own customers in government and citizens to secure their devices, but also helps the companies that produce them and develop them understand what they can do to make them easier to use by our customers. And we found that a very helpful way of engaging with industry as well as advising our customers. On the right is the three output documents from the first iteration of our Secure by Default Partnership Program, which is an initiative to help some smaller government departments generate case studies of using cutting-edge technology. In particular, looking at alternatives to passwords and streamlining the user logon experience, but actually using government departments to trial those technologies so that they can be public about how they worked, what they learned, and what's improved. So again, it's not just a security nerd like me standing here telling you what they can do. We've actually got the admins of those departments who've produced the guidance there that's on our website that explains what the benefits were. And that's something we'd like to continue over time, to show by example rather than just by force of lecturing and gesticulation like this. So this is a global problem. That's basically why I'm here. Fixing the UK is not going to fix this problem overall because the UK is a very small part of the global market. So we need these incentives to be different across the world and certainly in different markets, government, but also industry, and for home users. We need to be much clearer about what we want to see, and we also need to help people develop the right products and measure them appropriately and hold them to account. So that's why I'm here asking for help. So thanks for listening, but really this is about communication. So I'm going to reiterate exactly where we've got to. We need to be able to say what we really need. So let's state the outcomes we're actually interested in. I want to make this easier for people. I want devices to be easier to manage. I want to help people make good choices. So just telling them they're more secure or that everything's on fire or that everything's broken is really not the way to deal with this. We've got to be objective and we've got to help people understand what to do. It's about supporting developers because developers get to make the choice of which features are adopted in the devices that they use. So if we can help them understand that the right thing to do is also the easiest thing to do and help support that decision, then we're likely to get better devices as a result. And finally, last but not least, please fix firmware updates. We cannot have devices that we know are vulnerable, we know what the vulnerabilities are, and it's going to be another 6 months to a year before they're fixed. So this is something the industry as a whole has to get better at doing. And that's the end of my talk, so thank you very much.